Everyone, welcome to the Investor's Guide to Joy. Today I have Trevor LaParl at q1031.com. Today we're going to go through 1031 exchanges specifically for real estate and what that matters in terms of how that works with your current real estate and even actually for your personal residence, assuming that you have over a $500,000 capital gain. So Trevor, thanks for being here. Excited to talk about all things 1031.
Thanks for having me, Paul. I'm excited.
Yeah, you bet. So, the big thing that because I've done a 1031 exchange, right? Like, people could certainly like look up like what it is or, how it works, things like that. But let's assume we all know this. Like, what are things that people, don't know? What issues have you seen? Is kind of the nitty gritty, behind the scenes skeletons in the closet?
Yeah, the biggest concerns when it comes to the real estate investor at some point is your capital gains, right? We all go into it with, hey, we want to get rent rolls, whether it's through an Airbnb, a single family home that you're renting out, or maybe a multifamily building. At some
Yeah.
point, you either want to swap it or you want to be able to cash out. And so that big tax bill comes into play. And what do you have to do? What can you do? And there's plenty of options out there, but which ones make the most sense or the hardest to navigate?
Mhm. Yeah. So tell me more, like, are you doing 1031s? Are you providing a 1030 like one service? Are you doing both? Like, what is that like?
Yeah, we like to do both because we originally started out with just our 537 installment sale trust program that I'll hop into in just a minute. But
Yeah.
we saw a lot of people that were doing 1031s, and I think the number right now is around 60-ish% of 1031 exchanges either fully fail or partially fail, to where it's
Wow.
like, hey, I have a $2 to $3 million sale and I'm trying to drop into maybe four buildings. Three out of the four go through, and then what happens to that fourth building that didn't go through, and I have, let's say, 500,000 to 800,000 in gains that are just going to becoming boot, and that 500, 800,000 is now spiking my income, and all goes downhill from there. So a lot of times we were seeing people from our own clients that were failing, so we're like, hey, why don't we start our own 1031 exchange, and then we have this 537 IST installment sale trust to back into if it fails. So we recently had our language approved for a qualified intermediary. That's what a QI is, what every 1031 has to have to be able to
Yeah,
operate.
sure.
And with that, we had it approved to back into the installment sale trust. So what happens there is, hey, same example, let's say you have $3 million coming through, three of your four properties went, and let's say it's $700,000 of capital gains that were not able to be rolled into the next property. You could
Hmm.
back in with the other $700,000 into the installment sale trust and still defer the capital gains.
Okay. Yeah. So I guess as you've seen, 60% fail with the 1031s, like how have you seen that, decrease? Is that meaning it's, 100% because you're kind of that catch-all?
Yeah, we're 100%, capital gains deferral rate is what happens here. We recently had two that did it. We had one gentleman that was in Northern California, and he was looking to swap and actually found out about the IST later on. And he's like,
Yeah.
you know what, my deal's not going to come through anyway. I'm kind of not looking to re-enter real estate, so this IST will actually work out for me just fine. He
Mhm.
had an upleg into two different properties, and I think it was Reno, Nevada, or somewhere close in the Reno area.
Okay.
And it just didn't work out for them. They typically what happens is it gets frustrating. People know that you have the timeline for the 1031. So they really
Sure.
try and grind you because you have no other option. And they were
Yeah.
just grinding him too much on it. And it just worked out to back into the installment sale trust. Now he's getting passive income off of it. He doesn't have to deal with the active management. And he's actually
Mhm.
getting more income than what he had from the rent rolls. So it works out even better for him.
So yeah, I mean that's interesting. What kind of returns are you getting then with a trust and what that's, like, right? Because, some people could think it's just, hey, putting it into like a money market or something. Or it just is like like I'm looking at selling my Austin property, for example, doing a wraparound, and it's like, oh, hey, we'll give you the interest rate of your current loan. Well, pound sand, I don't want 3% on
Yeah.
stuff, right? So, curious about how that, kind of works.
Yeah, absolutely. With the installment sale trust, you can invest in a lot of different things. It could be stocks, bonds, annuities, money market funds. It could be a Reg D offering or a big real estate project.
Okay.
With our standard model that we have, we typically do a portion of the money in a heavily diversified basket ETFs. And then
Mhm.
we typically use the other half with some sort of principal insurance. So either a bond portfolio, a fixed indexed annuity, or something that has downside protection. Because the big structure with the installment sale trust is let's say, for example, you decided to do an IST with us. We
Yeah,
could name it the PG25 trust as an example. Your
sure.
initials and the year we did it, but we want to make sure we don't have your name on it for asset protection reasons, and that's a whole thing for another day.
Yeah.
And what happens there is we'll drop the funds into the PG25 trust. From
Okay.
there, you get everything in exchange for a secured note that collateralizes that trust. So it's almost like you're indirectly taking a loan against your own monies, and that loan has an interest rate. So with our standard model, if you were to decide to accept our model as collateral for your note,
Hmm.
that model would look like I said, half the money in the basket of ETFs and half the money in one of those principally insured models. And then we do 6% as a guaranteed interest rate, and we average anywhere from 10 to 12. So what that looks like is, let's say on $1 million example, just for pretty numbers sake here, you decide to put $1 million in the installment sale trust, you do our standard model. Our obligation to you at minimum is we kick out 60 grand a year to you, and then on any 10-year period, have return of principal. But what typically happens is we have people that are in year 3 or 4 calling us up saying, hey, I had this original $1 million in the trust. You guys
Yeah.
did well with the money. Money went from $1 million to $1.2 million. Can I refinance my note and start getting 6% off $1.2 million? Absolutely. Or can I refinance my note and take out the $200,000 of gains and go take my family on a nice trip to Italy and France or whatever? That works too.
Sure. Okay. So, yeah, the $1 million example, you said 6% return, but you're doing about what sort of percentages right now?
10 to 12. So
Okay.
6 is what's guaranteed on the note. We have to have some sort of, like any note, interest rate tied to it. But we have more growth inside the trust as well. So if you want to tap into that, you're able to tap into it at the end of the year, and
Okay.
take additional out if need be, or take out some of your capital gains if you want to deplete the account too. Either way.
Sure. Okay. And that's where the like refinance idea comes to be because it's growing more than what it initially was, essentially.
Exactly. Yep.
Okay. Now, what is I mean, let's just think about, even for myself, right? So I have a property in Austin, again, was going to wrap it, 1031, exchange it, or I could just do it as a normal primary residence because I've lived in it at 2 out of the last 5 years, right?
Yep.
But is there any, option for me to do this? Would I have to do a traditional sale? Do you work with like wraps or subject to? How does that all kind of intertwine?
Yeah, it really works with anything. The big, rule of thumb is at close of escrow, you have to make sure you don't have what's called constructive receipt of the funds. So basically what that means is if you were to, at close of escrow, have the funds hit your bank account, then that's where you have the constructive receipt
Yeah.
time, all
Okay.
becomes taxable.
Okay.
If you have it go into the 1031 or go into the IST, you are scot-free.
Hmm.
That's a big rule of thumb. So any sort of capital gains, doesn't matter if it's a, personal residence, a TIC structure, or investment property. If there's 20 partners or one partner, as long as your portion of the funds land inside the trust or the
Hmm.
1031, you have that capital gains tax deferral.
Sure. Okay. And I mean, there's no, because you would sell something as a wrap around mortgage, right? That would
Yeah,
not be considered a sale, which then would not be subjugated to capital gains because it's simply a loan.
correct.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. So, what sort of like costs or fees can people expect for these types of 537 installment sales?
Yeah, totally. It makes sense for people that are 500,000 and up in terms of the capital gains, because these trusts are just a one-off. So one unique thing compared to the, probably you've heard of the Delaware statutory
Yeah,
trust
sure.
structure, where it's like, hey, you're a smaller piece of a bigger pie. A lot of the times they'll say it's no fee, but it comes out of your rate of return, and it's not the most I don't know how to say this correctly, I guess morally correct, I guess you could
Mhm.
say. I don't like
Yeah.
people that are saying, oh yeah, we're giving you 7, but actually they made 15 in the background, but they didn't have any fees. It just came out of your rate of return. So we're
Mhm.
big on being fully, disclosure of everything to people. What
Yeah.
we have is a one-time fee to administer. So it could be one transaction, it could be 50, doesn't matter. It's just you need one trust, and that's 10 grand up front. We have a pretty star-studded team of attorneys. For example, our lead tax attorney, Michael Borwick, he actually goes to the IRS and teaches their tax attorneys the CEs on this topic. So every year, like a financial advisor or a CPA or really anybody in any industry has continuing education. And the requirements they have at the IRS, occasionally we will go over there and tell them about these installment sales, because there's plenty of different types of things that people can peek at. And there's been a couple headaches with things like monetized installment sales. And if you look that up, that's like on the IRS 30 dozen. That's not this one, but monetized installment sales have been, and maybe you've heard of it being in the real estate industry. People were selling their real estate in something kind of like the similar structure, but the difference is the note they hold against the trust, as an example, they're getting loans against it. So they were making basically, hey, I have $1 million tax deferred in the trust, that's getting invested. And then I'm taking a loan like you would against a security or brokerage account, and then getting additional money to invest in. So they were getting a loan against their tax deferred dollars, which was too much going on and not allowed in the tax code.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's interesting to, think about how it's working. You mentioned it's, for one tax creation, but it's for just that specific thing. So said another way is, if I sell a property in April and I sell a property in September, I can't put that within the same, because it has to be in the same action. So I think of like kind of pulling a trigger. When you pull the trigger, everything that's, there in line sight, that gets in the trust. If it's, two separate targets, two separate times, then it can't be. Is that what I'm understanding?
Actually, it can be. So all you need is one trust. So for example, we can have the PG25 trust, and let's say we have $1 million sale in March, and then in June you have another $1 million sale. What would happen is the original note you have against the trust would be for $1 million, and then whatever the value is at, plus the, let's say, another $1 million coming through for the June property, would be refinanced to that new value, and then you keep going, is what happens there. So each time you add a property, it just resets the clock on there, and you can keep deferring the taxes.
Resets the original clock?
The clock of the note. So like any note, it has to have a declared interest rate and a declared timeline. For sake of conversation, for our structure, we do if you do our standard model, guarantee 6 and then a 10-year note structure. So at minimum, our obligation to you on $1 million example again would be to send over 60 grand a year, and then it's interest only, and then have the original $1 million back in the trust, let's say in 2035. That would be our at minimum obligation to you. So what happens is when you add more money in or take more money out, that's going to reset the timeline and reset the deferral clock. So the good thing about the installment sale trust is you could really defer indefinitely. And this can still get passed down to your heirs with things like a step up in basis. So you're not missing out on the, step up on the real estate or on any other assets you might have, and lose out with, you might be familiar with it. It's a little bit termy. It's called IRD. So like, for example, your traditional IRA, when you pass that down to your kids or maybe to a friend or whoever it may be, that has that 10-year rule, and it's all going to be taxable. Does not get a step up in basis, unfortunately. But with the installment sale trust, it does. So let's say you pass away and now the trust is at $3 million. That $3 million can go to all of your heirs tax-free.
Okay. So is that something that should be like put in a will to then, because this is basically just avoiding the capital gains from, the sale of a, deceased family member's property?
Essentially. So what you want to do is it'll wrap into your living trust pretty nicely. And so your living trust is going to be the big umbrella over everything. The note you hold against the installment sale trust will be under that umbrella. So the note can be held against that. And then what happens is you'll have that, again, structure of where some people, we have a lot of people coming in and they have kids that are inheriting, $3-5 million each. So they're like, hey, I'm going to force them to be what's called an income beneficiary, to where, hey, you can't take $5 million up front and go buy a Lamborghini and go buy dumb stuff. I'm going to force you to only take income from here and not have any touching of the principal until maybe you get a master's degree or a PhD, or sometimes people add different thresholds in there with age or accomplishments to make sure that the money stays in the family.
Okay. Yeah. Um, so is that something that the like for example, like my parents would need to create the living trust, or that I would need to create my living trust so that, when they pass that, capital gain would then be brought to me and put in, a living trust. It's almost, yeah, like how you would go about structuring that essentially with siblings type thing.
Yeah, the structure would be if it was, let's say, your parents' property that they were
Yeah.
selling and using the installment sale trust or whatever it may be, you'll want to make sure it's under their living trust. And then
Yeah.
you are the
Yep.
beneficiary along with any other siblings you have of
Yep.
that living trust. And then whatever terms they put in there, we have to abide to.
Okay. So, I mean, does that then mean if like parents have living trust, properties in living trust, like is that something that, I need to look into doing a 537 installment sale, or is that, or am I like covered at that point?
You'll need both, and the right answer to the question is you'll probably have a mix of the two.
Okay.
What we typically see is some people are really, I'll give a good example here. We had one gentleman, he had five very large multifamily properties, and he has two right now in Manhattan Beach that are just breadwinners. Never had a problem anywhere from 500 to 600 each thousand in rent rolls. So
Yeah.
he has a weekly meeting on Monday mornings like this, a little Zoom call, checks in
Yeah.
with the property managers. He's good to go. But he had three duds, and he's like, I cannot stand these properties. I need to get rid of them, but I just don't want to pay the taxes on it. He came
Sure.
to us. We deferred the taxes on the three property sales that he didn't want to deal with anymore, and then he
Yeah.
kept the other two. So his living trust has a mix of the installment sale trust note, and then also these other two properties in there as well. So if something happens to him, his kids, or whoever is going to inherit everything will get a mix of the cash from the trust and then also these two real estate properties.
Okay. So it's almost making me think if it's going from trust to trust, then there's
Mhm.
no, gain essentially that was recognized.
Yeah, so the rule of thumb here, and a lot of people aren't aware of it, a transfer to a trust does not trigger due on sale clause.
Okay.
So when you transfer things to a living trust or transfer it to like an installment sale trust, it does not trigger a capital gain on there, which is nice. So when you are, moving things around your living trust or like I said, the installment sale trust, there is no capital gains until you sell.
Okay, yeah. One other question I had was, okay, so if we're kind of resetting the clock, we kind of want to play this infinite game. So are you needing to do it every 6 years or every 10 years?
Every 10 is the model if you don't refinance throughout the process. Because what typically happens is that note is, like I mentioned earlier, set structure to where, hey, 60 grand now for income is not going to look the same in 2030, right? So
For sure.
typically what happens is, hey, the trust accrues in value. You want to increase your income stream. So most people don't wait out that 10-year period. Some do. Because some people, even as well, decide to not take any income at all and they defer all the interest in the trust, let it grow and, like a dividend reinvesting pretty much let it grow
Hmm.
tax deferred, and you decide to pull it out when you pull it out. So
Okay,
that timeline is a 10-year hard timeline. So what happens is year nine comes around, or let's say year nine, 9 months in, we'll call you up and say, hey, Paul, you've been with us for a little over 9 years now. Do you want to keep going? Do you want to take the lump sum and pay the taxes? What are you feeling right now? If you say, hey, I still don't want to pay the taxes, let's continue the structure, refinance the note. Great. So let's say it went from 1 million to 1,500,000. Your new note would be for 1,500,000 at 6%, and then now you're going for a whole other 10 years from now. But at any point in time, the good thing is you can pull that money out. So if it's like, hey, you know what? I'm tired of the US, there's too much going on here. I want to get to France or Italy. I don't care
yeah,
about the tax. Let's just take all the money out and adios amigos. You can do that too. So it's the most flexible and simple way to exit without the capital gains taxes up front and still
sure.
have controls over what your, life is going to look like along with your tax situation.
Yeah, no, you bet. That so one you mentioned Reg D in terms of what you could invest in, right? So my
Yep.
question would be like if I go Reg D on say a multifamily deal, right, which has a typical 3 to 5 year exit.
Yep.
Um, that let's start there. What happens when they exit, right? That then additional, piece and kind of those capital gains there. Again, you would just like we talked about, just roll into what you existingly have.
Yeah, just recycle it back in. So
Yeah.
that would, change up the structure a little bit with our note. When
Okay.
people, we have probably around 90% that do our standard model, 10% that don't. So of that 10%, half of them are doing great, half of them are well below what their original principal was, and hey, they accepted that risk.
Mhm.
So, and then given the fact that you're well aware with the Reg D offerings, there's not a, much liquidity, if any, in those. So when people do have those exits coming through, they can either go back into the trust, they can take those back out if they want to. But it is a little bit more of a step-by-step play. And what happens is the note gets tied to the interest rate of whatever that asset does. So, we can't pay 6% on, let's say, a Reg D offering that had zero that year, or maybe they're not doing as well and things got expensive. You probably saw a lot in 2008, 2009 that didn't pay for a couple of years. And
Yeah.
so we haven't seen a whole lot of people going into the Reg D offerings.
Oh, really?
As
Okay.
of recently, not so much just because of the, economic outlook. And, we've heard the song before. We like to peek at the PPMs because sometimes a lot of the investors aren't aware of things like capital calls to where, hey, if you don't give us another $100,000, we're going to dilute your shares and,
Sure.
nothing you can do about it. And so things like that we have to be careful of. I'll be careful of within the trust because we don't
Yeah.
want our clients having to put money in the trust to be able to keep their investment inside.
Sure. Okay. Yeah. Another question is going to be, there's kind of like debt funds or even just investing in, like basically private placements exclusively in oil and gas
Yep.
in, uh, not necessarily like mineral rights, even though you could do that, right? But like,
Yep.
we specifically have opportunities for high income earners who want to offset their taxes, as well as have, consistent income stream from oil and gas because they're already operating wells, right? There's a portfolio.
Hmm.
But some of those deals last, 10 to 20 years. So
Yep.
it's just kind of the question of, what does that look like if we have, $1 million and we invested, call it, 200 into some sort of Reg D, right?
Yep.
Does that mean that the 800 is getting the 6% or the million is getting the 6%, but then you are also getting the principal from, the Reg D that you went into?
The right answer is kind of both. So you can have it tied to whatever. The beauty with the installment sale trust is, as the note holder, you have every right to accept or every right to dictate what you will and will not accept as collateral for your note. So whatever those terms may be, maybe you're like, hey, I want it to be, 800 with you guys, and I want that 6% model with return of principal, the guarantee plus more. And then I want an extra 200 to where, hey, I'm in the oil and gas or another Reg D offering. That's
Mhm.
absolutely doable. And then whatever that Reg D offering does, maybe you just let it be a buy and hold, or maybe you only take whatever interest comes out of it. So
Sure.
there's a lot of flexibilities with how the note can be structured.
Yeah, certainly. Because like 6%, although is a good, floor, single digits isn't something to exactly jump out of bed for.
No.
And so especially when you're looking at, a debt fund that might be maybe an 8, but probably more a 12, and then oil and gas is going to be 15 to 30%. Granted, again,
Yep.
it depends on the nuances of it because not everything is the same related to oil and gas.
Yep.
But at least, the ones we do, we're getting, high 20s. So yeah, I was just curious how that all stacked to be. So yeah, that's very fascinating and great to know within real estate. And we've talked about a number of different things. Like, what maybe comes to mind? Is there something that we haven't shared or talked about that you think, man, just like most people ask this question, have these problems, are unaware of this, that listeners are just like, wow, everything has been amazing, and this additional point.
Yeah, I would say like the cherry on top really is the asset protection portion. And here's where some people get caught up with complex tax structures and trust planning and estate planning like this, is because a lot of the times you cannot be the trustee for it. You have to have what's called a TPA, a third party administrator, or a trustee service to
Yeah.
facilitate something like this for you. So kind of like a 1031 exchange, you can't do your own 1031. You can't do your own installment sale trust. You have to have what's again called a TPA, a third party administrator, set it up for you, or else you don't get the tax deferral. There's things in the code called step doctrine and more that say, hey, you can't be getting this tax deferral and have the control over everything. And
Mhm.
some people don't even realize, even with their retirement accounts, it's through a TPA, and that's how they get their tax deferral. So whether it's Chase Bank or Schwab or Fidelity, all those are TPAs with the board of trustees, and it's the same structure, but it's almost a little bit more family office style if you're aware of how those operate. So some people on the lower end, usually, the sub $1 million deals get caught up with the idea that, hey, some it's with the trustee service, and how do I know they can't run off with my money? These bank accounts and structures are the most secured accounts you've likely had or will ever have in your entire life. And
Mhm.
occasionally people get caught up with that idea of, oh, how do I know they can't run off or Bernie Madoff my money? Um, these accounts have, like DACA agreements. We work with like City National Bank. So you have an app on your phone that says, hey, if you decided to approve a, $200,000 wire to Paul or to Trevor, I'm sure you wouldn't approve of that unless you
Sure.
wanted to send us $200,000. So some people get caught up on that side of it, but it's great for the estate planning portion because let's say, for example, we have the PG25 trust and you have $1 million note against it at 6%. And out of nowhere, had a long night, you fell asleep at the wheel, you hit a bust of nuns. You're like, oh crap, guys, they're trying to lean all my assets. I'm in big time trouble. What can we do with this trust, guys? You call us up
Yeah.
and say, hey, can I refinance my note and defer interest for 10 years? Sure, no problem. We have direct language in the trust to where we cannot act under your request when you're under duress. So under duress would be, hey, you hit a bust of nuns and you have lawyers coming after you. You have a lot of problems coming your way. That's not in
Mhm.
your best interest. And so that's where
Sure.
it's good to have things like a trustee service or maybe even a one-off trustee where it could be like I don't know, a CPA yours or an advisor or an attorney for a lot of your assets because now you are the beneficiary of this, but not the indirect owner of it. And like Rockefeller said, you want to own nothing and control everything. That's a big motto we have here too.
Yeah, that's awesome. Incredible. Yeah, I mean, great insight for real estate investors, and just, people who own real estate. So yeah, thanks for coming on, sharing your wisdom.
Thanks a lot for having me. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah, you bet.